One of the most significant developments in what had been South Vietnam after the war was the establishment of socialism. So after 1975, after the end of the war, the post-war communist government imposed the North Vietnamese model, or North Vietnamese economic model of a socialist system, onto South Vietnam. The post-war government abolished private businesses and replaced them with collectively owned businesses. So business owners, including small business owners, shopkeepers, either had to sell their business to the government or they had to join government-owned or collectively owned businesses. Farmers were encouraged to join agricultural collectives, although many independent farmers remained. The agricultural collectivization actually happened at a somewhat slow pace in South Vietnam. An important component of this new socialist system that formed in South Vietnam were the new economic zones. The government was worried about the overcrowding of the cities. They were also worried about inadequate food supply. So the goal of the new economic zones was to increase food production. So the way it worked was that the government forcibly relocated people from the overcrowded cities to these remote areas called new economic zones. So these new economic zones often took place in remote areas in the countryside and somewhere in the highlands. And the idea was that these people in the new economic zones were supposed to open up new land for food production, for farming. The problem was that many city people did not know how to farm. So they arrived in these new economic zones without the skills to actually start farming, especially farming virgin lands. And the government often did not provide adequate training or supplies. And because of that, the conditions in the new economic zones were terrible. One of the key components of the socialist system was the food procurement system. This had existed in North Vietnam, and now the communist government sort of exported it or imposed it on South Vietnam. So the way it worked was that the government calculated the number of people who lived in cities and allocated a quota of food for all of them. So it calculated the amount of food it needed. Then the government went to independent farmers and agricultural collectives in the countryside and bought food, bought crops. And they bought them at below market prices. Then the government would take this food to the cities and sell the food to city residents at below market prices. And city residents could buy this food using government-issued coupons. The problem with the system was that it was very mismanaged and rife with corruption. Also, lots of farmers didn't necessarily want to sell their crops at below market prices. So they either didn't sell the crops or they didn't grow as much as they could. And this resulted in a lot of shortages. These shortages were made even worse by the trade embargo that the United States imposed upon Vietnam after the war. So between the trade embargo and this food procurement system, there was massive shortage in food and commodities in post-war South Vietnam.